Most every week up here with this book. This is the United Methodist Worship and Music Planner, and it is second only to the Bible in my universe because it contains big chunks of the Bible. It's all of the lectionary passages cut out and presented on one page, and on the other page there are some hymn suggestions and things you might use as a part of your worship service. If you follow along with the scripture reading in your pew Bible, and the Bible up here actually correlates page to page with the ones you have, you may have noticed that my reading has been different than yours this last 3 or 4 months. And that is because, in their infinite wisdom, the creators of the Worship and Music Planner have stopped using the New Revised Standard Version, which is what we have here, and begun using the Common English Bible, which is a fine translation, but gosh darn it, it's not the one I'm used to. Now, I never thought I'd catch myself saying that. I've said all along, it doesn't matter what translation you use, whatever you're most comfortable with. And that is true. Jesus did not speak English, not even the King's English. Jesus spoke in Aramaic. The Bible originally came to us in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, was translated into Latin, was translated into German, latterly translated into English, and since the King James Version has been translated over and over again. Essentially, the message is the same. And what matters not so much the actual words, but the meaning of the scripture. So find an edition that you are comfortable reading and read it. It's not doing anybody any good if it's sitting there gathering dust. That being said, today I brought out my old, handy, trustworthy NRSV and set aside the Common English Bible just for a moment, because this is a passage that I'd memorized and loved in the NRSV, and it's just that slight bit different in the CEV. So, this story in Genesis of Abraham and Sarah, God comes to them and says, "You elderly folks, nearly 100 years old, with no children, are going to become the ancestors of multitudes." Now, receive that as Abraham might have received it. Here is a man who has no heir in a culture, in a society where it was really important to have sons to carry on your name. And he has no children at all. And he's, up there in years. So he has no expectation of children. And suddenly God has come and said, "You are going to be the father of multitudes." It says, "And Abraham fell on his face." Blap. Now, he might have been down there rejoicing. But Sarah, who is equally elderly, hears the word, "And you will be the mother of kings." And she probably fell on her face too, but not for the same reason, okay? God has a plan for these two folks. God doesn't present it to them as a choice. God presents it as the plan. You, Abraham, and you, Sarah, are going to get new names. You were Abram and Sarai. Now you're going to be Abraham and Sarah. How would you like it if I changed your name? If I said, "Alice, you look like a Penelope to me. From now on, it's Penelope, and everybody is going to call you that." God doesn't give them a choice. God just gives them new names. And God then says, "I was wondering if you would like to have a child, and that child might be the father of generations." God says, this is what's going to happen. Get on board with the plan. So, Abraham and Sarah accept the new names, accept the promise, but the promise doesn't come as quickly or in quite the way that they originally thought that it would. So they take a few detours, trying to take control of things. And God has to do some corrective action in there. It's really a great story if you don't read it like it's oh so serious. This was not, if you were in this family, sitting around telling family stories, the story of Abraham and Sarah would not be told as a serious story. There are really hilarious bits in there. It's a trickster story, like Coyote or Raven in the Native American stories. Read Abraham and Sarah's story, and don't read it like it's the most serious thing you've ever read. Look for the humor in what they do and what God has to do to fix it. There are truly some tragic parts in there. And you will see the beginning of millennia of conflicts in this story. But you will also see what happens when human beings try to take over the role of God and maneuver and engineer things better in their heads than they think God is doing. Which brings us to Mark and to poor Peter. We have to look outside of the lection text to really get what is happening in this story. Because it has been preached in isolation for a long time. My bookmark slipped. Oh well, I'll get it back. This is in Mark 8. And oftentimes you'll hear this preached, and it will be cut off at the beginning where it says, Jesus gathers and begins to teach. This is the first of Jesus' 3 predictions of the Passion in the Gospel of Mark. So Jesus gathers them up and tries to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great sufferings, be rejected by the elders, the priests, and the scribes, be killed, and after 3 days rise again. Peter takes him aside and obviously says, No, Jesus, I don't think that's a good plan. That suffering, the killing, the dying, the cross, not a good plan. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. And a lot of times you hear that preached in a way that conveys that Jesus is rejecting or putting Peter aside. But really, that isn't what's happening. If you look right before the 31st verse, if you look clear back to the 27th verse, Jesus and the disciples are traveling from village to village in Caesarea Philippi. And between stops, Jesus just casually asks the disciples, who do people say that I am? And they say, well, John the Baptist. And some others say Elisha. And still others, they say you're a prophet. And Jesus says, but then who do you say I am? And Peter says, you are the Messiah. To which Jesus replies, not good answer, Peter, but don't say that to anybody, okay? Why? Peter's got the right answer. You are the Messiah. Why aren't they allowed to tell? Because they don't understand what it means. They've got the word, but it's empty of the meaning that Jesus needs them to receive. When they think Messiah, when Peter thinks Messiah, he thinks about a warrior king on a white stallion with a great army who is going to take over and kick out those Romans and reestablish the power and might of Israel. When Jesus thinks Messiah, when God talks about the Messiah, that's the next verse. Peter says, you are the Messiah. And Jesus sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He is trying to teach them what the Messiah is. He doesn't want them preaching that he's the Messiah, because what they're going to be teaching is he's that warrior king, and he isn't. He wants them to hear who he really is. And especially Peter. It is vital that Peter understand what God's plan for the Messiah and the salvation of humanity is. Peter takes Jesus aside and he says, Lord, no, bad plan. Let's go back the other way. They'll never catch us. We'll go hide out in the mountains. Jesus says, get behind me, tempter. You have your mind set on human things, not on heavenly things. In other words, you're on the human plan, not God's plan. Get behind me. Hey, are you guys behind me? I have this great plan. Are you behind me? It doesn't mean get away from me. It means get in line with me. Get on board with me. Jesus especially needs Peter to get on board, to absolutely understand God's plan. Who is the Messiah? What is he going to do? How is humanity going to be saved through him? Peter needs to get rid of his ideas that the Messiah is a warrior king, and understand that the Messiah is Jesus on the donkey and then on the cross. Peter needs to get rid of his ideas that the Messiah is for the Jewish nation only, and get on board, get behind God's plan that the Messiah is for all people. If you look over in Luke 22, it's not the identical story, but it is the same story. The story of Jesus having talked to the disciples. Again, there are 3 predictions of the Passion, and this is after the third one. Jesus is trying to teach them who the Messiah really is. And he takes Peter aside. Remember, Peter took Jesus aside. Now Jesus takes Peter aside and says, listen, Satan has demanded to sift all of you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your own faith may not fail. And then Simon goes on to say, I'd never betray you. Jesus knows that's not true. Jesus knows it isn't true that Simon won't ever betray him. But what Jesus says to Simon Peter, he says, I have prayed for you that your own faith may not fail. And once you have turned back, you strengthen your brothers. Jesus knows that Peter is going to deny him. Jesus knows that Peter's going to run away. Jesus knows that he doesn't completely understand the plan, but he has faith, okay? Faith is not perfect understanding. Faith is trust in God. Jesus doesn't pray to God, please let Peter not deny me. He doesn't pray, please let Peter not run away like all the others. He doesn't pray, please let Peter completely understand your plan for the redemption of humanity. He prays, Father, let his faith not fail him. Faith is not faultlessness. Faith is not complete understanding. But faith is trust in God, even when we don't understand. When we can't feel the presence of God, faith assures us that God is. So, what about you? Abraham and Sarah are conscripted into God's plan. They try and take it onto themselves from time to time, because doesn't everybody like to be in charge of their own destiny? What do they say? Make your plan and follow it. Now, there was a cute little saying that I found. Anyway, make a plan and stick with it. Take charge of your destiny. It feels good to know where you're going and to be on top of getting there. But that isn't always what life brings. Abraham and Sarah never imagined in their life plan that they would, after a certain age, become parents. Certainly never imagined that their descendants would be kings. Peter never imagined, when he began following Jesus, that the destination was Jerusalem and there would be a cross in the road before the resurrection. He never even imagined the resurrection. God has plans for us. Jesus had a plan for Peter to be the head of the church. God had a plan for Abraham and Sarah to be the parents and multitudinously great grandparents of generations. We can't see where God's road is taking us. We don't know God's plan for us. We try and work our own plan for our lives, and a lot of times that goes right along with God's plan. It does. But there come tests. Satan, said Jesus, has decided to sift you like wheat. There will be tests. There will be turns in the plan that we could never imagine being possible. You're Abraham, you're 99 years old. How are you going to be a father? It's not going to happen. It isn't logical. It makes no sense. It can't happen. We're going to run into things that make us try and take control of our own lives. We're going to run into things that seem impossible, so we drag our heels and refuse to go down that road. We don't have to be perfect in following God's plan. God knows we're human beings. The people he chooses, they're human beings. We're going to fail. We're going to fall. We're going to doubt. We're going to question. We're going to try and go the other way. My prayer for each one of us is Jesus' prayer for Peter. Not that we are perfect in walking the way, but that when we fail to see where we're supposed to go where God clearly tells us we're supposed to go, to do what God needs us to do to further God's plan, that we may not fail in our faith. I pray for you that your own faith may not fail, and you, once you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. Are you strong enough in faith to go wherever God needs you to go down this road that God has planned for us? It's a deep question, but Lent is a season for deep questions. Can you pray not to see the road, but can you trust that it's there? Can you pray not to follow it perfectly, but to trust that God will assert some corrective action and keep you on the path? Can you pray simply for faith? And can you pray that your brothers and sisters have faith as well? And you, once you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. Can you share your faith so that others may be strengthened in theirs? Think about that this week in Lent. Now, Jesus comes to his final day on earth. He has tried mightily to get the disciples to understand what the next few days are going to hold. He knows they're going to need to get through this. He knows they're going to betray him. He knows they're going to be at the absolute depth of hopelessness when they see him on the cross and see him laid in the tomb. He knows he isn't going to be physically there for them when they need him the most. So he gives them one final gift, and that is the gift that we have come to call the sacrament of Holy Communion. You know, when you're on a long trip, you pack some snacks. You know where the drive-thrus are. You know where the roadside rest stops are. On a long trip, you need to stop and refresh yourself. Stretch a little bit, check the map, make sure you're going the right way. Get some more energy for the going on. That's the gift that Jesus gives us, that God gives us in the sacrament. It's a time when our ordinary touches God's holy. We stop, we reflect, we receive, we are directed, we are strengthened, and then we go on down the road. Remember in two ways today. Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me. Remember what he was giving the disciples on that night. He's going to be arrested in just a couple of hours. And also remember what he's giving you. It's not all that different from what he gives the disciples. But it is in a way. Because we know how the story is going to end, we don't need the strength to face Good Friday. But we don't know how our story is going to end, where it's going to take us, what life is going to bring us. We do need the faith and the strength to go on down the road, letting God be in control. And letting our faith bring us back when we go off in other directions. We